Hey guys, it's me again, Barry with Barry's 8-track and classic car radio pair, and my switch to mostly natural lighting is making each video a new adventure. Today we're going to be talking about the Telex TM. Oh, what model is this? The TMS 1001. This is the later version of the Telex. This was actually made by Telex, whereas the earlier version was originally designed by a company called Quadtron, who was later bought out by Telex. This newer design is much simpler in some ways. They took out a lot of the time shaping circuits and stuff like that for the new version that save as much money as they could. Took out some of the features, but the thing that I'm talking about mainly here. Well, first thing we'll go ahead and fire this thing up. I know you're probably going to want to watch it turn around and stuff, so we'll go ahead and turn her on, and we'll switch it. We'll run it through a few cycles. We'll let it let it turn a couple of times so you can see how it works. Pretty neat. And we'll just go. We'll make it so it switches tapes every program, just so you can see some of the cool operation of the unit. Okay, we just happen to be between songs on this track, so there we go. Alright, next tape. Now this tape, you can set it to change tapes after the full tape plays or after a single program. And right now I've got it set to switch tapes after a single program. So you'll play one program of each tape, then you'll play the second program of each tape, on and on. Now I'm keeping the songs pretty short because I don't want to be nailed too much for copyright stuff. Okay, so we'll stand her up for you so you can kind of take a quick look at the inside. I know you probably can't see it very well. Not a whole lot to see actually. There's a big old circuit board there with all your audio electronics. Nice big old power transformer here. Got a couple of motors and a couple of things that I added in there too as well. And here's your capstan. On this unit, the capstan is actually driven from the outside of the chassis and runs all the way through here to about there. Capstan's a big long rod. Okay, so now that I've given you guys a little bit of a eye candy treat here, now we'll go into what I had to do to get this thing fully repaired. So we'll turn it off for a moment here, and we're going to switch to a closer view. And okay, here's the switch that I added, or actually I removed a switch. This switch was originally over here, and it was a slightly different type of switch. Here's the switch that was in there. It's your basic leaf switch. You know, you press down on this, and that's how it activates that element, you know, to go ahead and switch internally. Problem with this one is they used a really stiff leaf on this one, and it doesn't really bend that well from this corner here. So when you go to press it, and I can listen to it, it's just now making contact. In fact, you have to have the edge of this thing all the way up against the body of the switch for this thing to make contact, or to break contact, depending on whether it's wired for normally open or normally closed. And that's what brings me to this weird little design flaw in this newer version of the Telex is this switch has to close once between each cartridge. As the carousel turns, you can see that it's got some cutouts. The carousel has some cutouts here. You may not be able to see them too well, but your carousel has cutouts here that serve a few purposes. For one thing, you can see that it serves this lock. There's a little lever that's driven off the cam, and that locks the carousel in place. You know, when it stops turning, the cam moves this lever inside that thing, so it's locked in place and can't turn. And so between each cartridge, there's a switch that has to close momentarily just one time. It can stay closed a little bit longer than it if it wants to, but the important thing is that there is a switch that closes every time a cartridge passes a momentary closure. Now what Telex did was they used a normally closed switch, which is kind of ridiculous because this switch only has to close momentarily between each cartridge, just not even half a second. And instead of using just a regular switch and pushing something against it to close it for that momentary time, they use a normally closed switch, and they got this thing they had this thing jammed up against the carousel so that not only do you have steel rubbing against plastic here, and I think we kind of know what the result of that's going to be eventually. Not only do we have steel constantly rubbing against plastic, we also have the switch constantly pressed against the carousel, dragging the carousel. Now, you saw the size of the motors in these things. They're the same size as the motors that I use. They're the same size as the motors used in most 8-tracks, but on this 8-track, this motor has to turn a big old cam, and it has to turn a couple of things that cam activates, and it also is responsible for turning this carousel. So there's quite a bit of load on this little bitty motor, and here's a little worm gear that comes up to turn the cam. It's not even a worm gear. It's a freaking spring. They slipped a spring over this thing to use as a worm gear, and because of spring, because of the angle that the spring hits it at, they even had to kind of offset this mount a little bit. And there's a spring action that pulls this worm gear to the cam. Now that's a fairly reliable mechanism, but this deal of having this normally closed switch continuously dragging on the carousel, except for when it hits this little bitty indentation here and opens momentarily, which in the case of the original switch, it was actually closing the switch when it was letting out. So at any rate, there was no reason, and the carousel was hanging up a little bit. It was a little bit hard to turn sometimes. Sometimes I had to reach in there and kind of help this gear a little bit. And it was because this thing is just constantly pressing against this carousel while it's trying to turn. So, it was kind of ridiculous because you can see these indentations. They probably represent less than 2 degrees of arc each one. So, you figure a complete circle is 360 degrees of arc. So, this switch is only engaged like half of 1% of the time that this carousel is turning. Actually, probably much less than that. So, why would it need to drag on the carousel 100% of the time and continuously be dragging it down? Well, because there's nothing sticking out of the carousel that could activate a normally open switch. That like they could have just molded a little nub in between here, and that as that nub passes, it presses on the switch momentarily and closes it, and that's all you needed. But no, they didn't mold any nubs on there. So there has to be a way. I would think that it would be better if this carousel could somehow move the switch instead of allowing the switch to open back up. Basically, the switch is completely dormant until it's time to close, and then boom, then let's expend a little bit of energy. But let's not use energy 100% of the time constantly dragging on this carousel, wearing down the plastic rubbing against the steel and all that stuff. So anyway, what I ended up doing was, you can see that there's a lever right here that between tapes, let's turn this thing back on, and anytime it's between cartridges, this thing is pushed out by this cam. So let's check this out. Watch this thing move out. See that right there? It's moving out, and it's momentarily closing the switch that I put in there, which is now a normally open switch like it should have been in the first place. And you can see there's no, the clearance on this original switch. Okay, it's right now it's still open. Now it's closed. Now it's open, closed, open, closed, open. You can hear it clicking. I mean, you can feel it clicking. That's less than a millimeter of travel required to open or close the switch, and that is an awfully tight clearance to try to get this thing perfectly adjusted to where, when this indentation comes around, it releases this lever just barely long enough to let that switch close. That was extremely unreliable. So that's why I went with this. This is just such a more reliable idea here, and this is something that an engineer may not have thought of, because they're over here, oh my God, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to do this? And it's the guy sweeping the floor that would have come in and said, well, this thing pushes out every time it's turning, so why not just put a normally open switch there and not drag it around? And the engineer's in the middle of his quadratic equation. He's going, yeah, get out of here, kid. You don't know nothing. So you never know what goes into the design of some of these 8-tracks. It's otherwise a pretty cool machine, but this little design flaw, it was just ridiculous. There's just no way. See, now we have our switch only closing when it's supposed to close, and it's not dragging on the carousel at all because it's directly operated by this lever, which is directly operated by the main cam. So it is no longer dragging on the carousel at all. Okay, when it's actually engaged, it may put just a slight little bit of strain on the cam, but not on the carousel. The cam's got plenty of torque to get the job done. But you know, not when there's something rubbing against the carousel all the time. Okay, so that was the purpose of this video. I'm not just to eliminate any confusion. I'm not here to help you fix your own unit. I'm here to show you why I'm the best guy to send it to. So don't be calling me and saying, "Hey man, I have a little bit more problem. Can you help me with this?" That's not why I'm here. I get way too many calls for people wanting free repair advice, taking up my time when I'm in the middle of jobs that have deadlines. And sorry guys, that's not why I'm here. I'm not a parts supply house, nor am I a source of free advice. So this actually is an advertisement. It's just to show how it's sometimes necessary for me to make design changes on an existing 8-track unit to make it perform, actually in this case, quite a bit better and more reliably. So that was the purpose of this video. I hope no one's offended. If you learned something about how to fix your unit, that's great, but don't call me and waste my time, or or don't be asking me questions or anything like that. So I'm Barry with Barry's 8-track and classic car radio repair, and you've seen some of the things that I'm capable of in my shop here. Got a nice little Telex going here. So my number is 928-533-9666. My website's in the description below. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.